try something a little bit different this week, just for curiosity, and I want to talk about visual management and why it's worth doing any kind of visual management of workflow. The first thing I think to say is that it's helpful as a tool for the work, right? And it's helpful in a couple of ways. It's helpful for us as a whole business because it does a couple of things for us. The first thing to think about when visual management is the fact that something like 30%, it depends on the statistics that you look at, but something like 30% of our brain is dedicated to processing visual information. So any way that we can harness that allows us to work with the power of our brain and to kind of work with the way that it most naturally wants to take information on board and process it. But also, by having a kind of visual management of the workflow, by having something up that's on a wall that represents the stuff that we're doing, as an organisation, we focus ourselves on the gemba, on the kind of core, on what it is that we actually do, the way that we make money. So, that kind of, that helps us see what we're about as an organisation more clearly. But also having a visual tool to manage stuff helps us frame conversations. And, it helps us talk about what's going on in the work and how it's going and where there might be problems and how we address that, and kind of focus those and have somewhere to kind of bring stuff up. So it kind of has a benefit for all of us if the work, that's really kind of weirdly dribbly, isn't it? A workflow of an individual team is visualized. But it also helps people in that team, right? As an individual, if you have your workflow of your team visualized, then you're able to do a couple of things kind of more easily. The first thing is, you're able to more easily see how the detail that you're working on at any one particular point in time fits in to the big picture, right? And it's very easy to, when we're in the midst of a kind of task, to lose track of what is the goal of our work. And if you remember, like if we're doing something like tax credits delivery, then the goal of the work is to take an individual claim for a client from end to end of the workflow, to start from the kind of first contact through until the point at which the invoice is delivered. Now, organisations which use visual management for workflow, this is quite often something that you'll see in organisations using Agile as a method for managing their projects, which is a particular approach to workflow that's particularly popular with software developers. And you'll often see, if people are talking about Agile, a big wall with lots of little post-it notes on, etc. And it seems like a very kind of low-tech solution. It seems kind of weird. Why would a tech software company want to manage their kind of product development workflow with post-it notes? And the answer is, I think, mainly for this reason. Because when you're in the midst of sitting at your computer doing some development work, it's very easy to get down a rabbit hole and to get stuck in some particular detail that needs to be solved or kind of made perfect. And you forget that actually what you're trying to do overall, is the big picture, is to meet that kind of overall goal. So it helps you maintain continuous sense of your priorities and actually, does this thing need to be this perfect? Is this particular detail really that problematic? Is it serving the goal? How does what I'm doing now fit into the big picture? But there's another way in which, so you can, So we have the sense that it can help us see the big picture. The other thing about seeing the big picture, right, is it puts more of a focus. It comes back to this point. It helps us put more of a focus on value. We see the work moving across the workflow. We see things moving through. We see that everything that we're doing should be adding value. It starts to help us frame those conversations about whether things are adding value or whether they're a form of waste. And it also helps us focus in the midst of, kind of busy and distracted world on completing tasks. It's very easy to think, okay, well actually how many things am I working on at the moment? I'm sort of halfway through this and halfway through that and I'm multitasking. Actually, one of the things that's kind of counterintuitive about workflow design is that one of the most efficient ways to work is single-piece flow. Think about Toyota, right, and their commitment to single-piece flow and the way in which they're probably the most efficient manufacturer of cars anywhere in the world. Single-piece flow is about saying you pick up a piece of work and you carry it absolutely as far as you can before you put it down, bearing in mind that you're carrying it across a chain where you're adding value. So we're always trying to move stuff as far across the workflow as we can before we put it down. So starting to think, actually, is this work at a point at which it makes sense for me to put it down? Remembering that there's a cost involved in any handover can be really useful. Sorry, I've got notes here so that I know what I'm drawing. Yeah, and we also, and it's also about thinking, it's about framing the conversation about when is a particular piece of work done. You know, when is it actually the point at which it's sensible for me to put it down? Okay, there are some other things that it can do for us as an individual. It can help us as an individual manage our own work in progress, the own kind of inventory of stuff that we're working on. And that links back to this sense of like task completion. Every time that we add, if you remember from GrantTree Fundamentals on Work in Progress last year, there are a whole load of reasons why every time we add something to our inventory on our work in progress, we're making life less efficient for ourselves. We're making our ability to deliver stuff go down. So actually, having a sense of the work that's ongoing and which bits of it we've actually picked up, and therefore how many pieces of work we personally have in progress, and what we need to do to move them out, is a really useful way of helping us be more effective. It also creates a way in which we can have more unambiguous handover. Because the thing about having a system that's somehow on a wall, you know, whether it's paper-based or digital, it doesn't really matter, is nevertheless totally unequivocal when I've given a piece of work to you or when I've given it back to the system. Whereas when you don't have an explicit visual management system for doing this, there can be ambiguity that creeps in that says, oh, well, I thought that I'd committed to that, or I thought that you'd committed to that. Whereas when you have a piece of paper which you actually have to go and move, or a name that you have to attach to something that other people can clearly see, then it's absolutely obvious when that's happening. Linked into this sort of way, another way of looking at this, as well as helping us see the kind of the detail in the big picture, we also start to frame things as an individual in terms of global optimization, rather than just local optimization. And that helps us think about two things. That helps us think about importance and urgency overall. You know, looking at the overall kind of big picture workload is the most important and urgent task being done. And if it isn't, why am I not doing it if I'm at a point at which I'm looking for the next task to do? You know, not just looking at it from your own point of view, but also by looking at a kind of global point of view, we can say, is any work getting stuck? Right? That was my little graph of the stuck. I thought I'll draw a tube of glue. You know, and if something is getting stuck, why is it getting stuck? Where is it getting stuck? What can we do to help? Right, so we have an opportunity to see, okay, you know, in a kind of brain-free way, try and understand what it is that's going on in the workflow overall. It's also the case that this sort of global optimization helps us not just as an individual, but it helps us as a team. There are some other ways that having visualization of the workflow helps us as a team. It is a powerful way of resolving tensions, surfacing and resolving tensions actually, because it allows us to identify the standards that we need to have in the work. Right? This is one of the things that I think that we come across a lot at the moment in our journey towards being a self-managing organisation, is my expectation of how this particular task is done is different from yours. Okay, so now we have visual management, we have something that's up there that actually says, okay, so this task hasn't moved from here to here, what happened there? Or this task moved from here to here, but not in the way that I was expecting. We have some way of framing these conversations and seeing where it is that there's ambiguity that we need to resolve and stuff that we need to agree a common way of doing. I think that there's just to be clear, like standard work is this term that comes from Toyota, and they have this particular way. On each workstation within a factory there will be a standard work, or a work standard, which is the kind of printout that they have on their workstation corkboard. This is how they do it, which basically says, you know, this is the stuff that must be done in this station. These are the responsibilities of individuals. These are some resources that you have available. It's basically a kind of like stripped down specification of what must be done. And it differs from sort of visual management, which is more about defining the workflow. So visual management is about defining things stage by stage by stage. These are the different things, these are the different workstations that an individual piece flows through. And then the work standard is about saying what is it that happens within those individual workstations, within those individual stages. It also so as well as helping us define the standards, which resolves tensions in an ongoing way, right? When things come up, we have the opportunity to do some kind of retrospective, whether it's on a regular scheduled basis or whether it's in an informal way. So that allows us to hold each other to account to the standards that we've agreed on behalf of the system. So it means that we don't say, oh, okay, well, you know, you're telling me that I'm doing it wrong, and that means that you're my manager and we're a self-managed organisation and it's falling apart. No, we actually see that what happens is the standards are held and owned by the system, and everybody within the system has the right to say, hey, can we look back at how that piece of work went and compare it to the standard, and if there's any kind of deviation from that standard, discuss it and think, well, do we need to change the standard? What are some reasons? Is there something that we need to learn? Also as a team, having a system of visual management allows us to engage in a process of ongoing improvement. That's a terrible thumbs up, but it's supposed to be a thumbs up. And we can engage in a process of ongoing improvement around the workflow. You know, we have the opportunity to try and reduce waste, and we also have the opportunity to manage bottlenecks, right? And the beauty of working on having a visual management of the workflow where the stages are laid out is if you say, oh, well, actually, maybe it would make more sense if we added another stage. You know, we noticed that a lot of work seems to go from this stage, this stage, this stage, and then there's an error, and it has to be reworked, and it has to go back a stage. Or maybe we could prevent it doing that by changing this stage, or adding another stage here, or moving something else here. Or let's say you identify, well, look, this is the stage where we have the most work stacked up. This is the biggest bottleneck that we have internally. It might make sense to say, well, let's stick in a quality control, a kind of verification stage before that, so that we're not sending work through the bottleneck, which might fail a subsequent quality control check, right? Or we might say, well, actually, it makes more sense to start the financials before the tech, or the tech before the financials. Let's pick up the pieces of paper that represent the order and move them around. Yeah, and as well as having a process of an ongoing improvement working on the workflow to move the stages around, to work out where the bottlenecks are, to look at the kind of waste. Like, for instance, a really interesting one about waste, I think, here is handovers. You know, how many handovers do we have typically on a piece of work that flows through tax credits? Is it the right number of handovers? Can it be reduced? You know, because every time we have a handover, there's a cost involved in that. You know, often quite a significant cost that we don't necessarily see. So it might make sense in some cases, and again, this is the way in which kind of workflow stuff can be counterintuitive. It might make sense to say, in order to avoid a handover, I'm going to hold on to this piece of work. Let's say, like, let's take verification as an example. If I've got a piece of work that I want to put through verification, I might say, actually, I'm not going to hand this over. I'm going to continue holding this piece of work and responsibility for it until it's verified by somebody else. And that might mean that I sit here, you know, as it were, doing nothing until the person who is ready to verify it is free, and I can go and sit next to them and make sure that it's done and take it back, because it's still my piece of work. Of course, when I say, you know, doing nothing, that might literally mean doing nothing, or it might mean dealing with some emails, or doing some kind of task force work, or doing some other part of the business, but not picking up another piece of client work until you've actually kind of pushed it through, and you've avoided some handovers, and it might actually make things more efficient, even though it seems like it isn't, right? Remember the point about single piece flow, focusing you on task completion focusing on adding value to the client. So we also have, as well as a process of ongoing improvement around the workflow, we have a process of ongoing improvement around the visualization, which is this kind of little meta loop. That we can say, well, what is it that we could do to the visualization that would make it more useful to us? You know, in GrantTree Fundamentals last year, this idea of kind of cost of delay was useful. People have thought, oh yeah, that would be useful, this kind of weighted, shortest job first approach to importance and urgency. But where do we record that information? Where do we put it in a way that's helpful for us to interact with? Well, it may be that some part of the visualization is a useful way of doing that. Okay, so those are some ways that visual management helps us with the work. It also helps teach us some really useful ways of thinking and behaving around interaction with systems, right? Kind of systems thinking. And it turns out, having been kind of thinking about this for the last few weeks and talking to Stephen Kern and doing some reading, that actually systems thinking is not only useful and powerful, but actually it's really key for a self-managing business. So for the next phase of our development in terms of embedding the practice of self-management, it's really important that we find ways of grasping this. And that's for a couple of reasons, right? The first thing about systems thinking and about visual management of the work is it allows us to see more clearly the separation between people and the work. And the great example here for me, I think, of this is that if somebody says to you, oh, will you do this particular task, right? It's completely legitimate in a self-managing business to just say, no, I'm not going to do it, right? Because there's some other stuff that I perceive as more important, or I'm fully committed, I can't take it on at the moment. But it's very easy to see that refusal to do this work that somebody else is being asking for to take on as being, you know, kind of a refusal of that person. Do you see what I mean? Somebody says no to you, and it becomes very easy to take it personally and think, oh, there's something about, you know, that person doesn't like me, or I've done something to offend them or whatever, and actually understanding, no, there's a difference between the work and the person. And by having a visual management system where we can see the work, where we can make it visible, where we can recognize that there is a separation of work and people, we start to get ourselves more in the mindset where actually we see, oh no, I'm not talking about the person, I'm just talking about the work. So, bless you. So, oh no, yeah, so the other thing that we can do that links into that, as well as making it visible that there's a separation between the people and the work, we actually kind of make the whole system of the business visible. Because the system is invisible, it's intangible, like a fixed asset, or like a myth, as Justin likes from the book Sapiens, Get Well, Uncle Beeves. We make it something that we can see, and something that we can operate on and we can, you know, recognize. Now, why is that important, right? It sounds lovely that I'm saying that, but why is that important? It's important because in self-management, the system is the king or queen, the monarch, the manager, right? Some of the things that managers do in organizations in general is that they have ongoing power. That's supposed to be a little bicep emoji. They have ownership of the work. That's somebody pointing and saying that it's mine. And they also are responsible for structuring things, right? The structure of the organization, the structure of somebody else's time, the structure of your workload and responsibilities. These are things that managers typically do in top-down organizations, or rather, these are exactly the things that managers do. But these are things that in a self-managing business, without managers, belong to the system. The system has persistent power. We pick up power over particular decisions and we exercise it on behalf of the system. The system is the thing that owns the work. Nobody has exclusive ownership or rights over a piece of work in self-management. Right? That's one of the kind of key principles, for instance, in Holacracy, and they have a whole series of mechanisms to manage it. And it's the system which is the structure. Now, if we don't see the system, and therefore we don't see that there is something in place, there is a kind of monarch doing all of these things, then we're always going to be trying to fill that slot ourselves. Or we're going to be unnecessarily stressed and overwhelmed by the fact that it appears that these things aren't being done. Right? So we're always going to see some kind of hierarchical managerial behaviour starting to come back and people trying to fill these slots until we can see that actually these are functions exercised by the system. But there's actually a double benefit here, which is that the more that we start to operate in a systems way and start to think in a systems way, actually the less of this stuff we need to define. The more we practice this kind of thinking, the more comfortable we become operating a business that actually has comparatively few defined structures and more creative chaos. But it's not an environment that is familiar for us to work in, and it's not an environment that we can sort of survive in as humans until we've started to develop some of the kind of systems thinking skills. So having a tool which helps us practice those all the time is really useful to us as a business on our journey. I think it's also important to say that the final thing that system thinking helps us do is it helps us get better at collaboration. Because, you know, collaboration, teamwork is about relationships. And I've said this many times before, But you become more powerful in making collaboration work when you recognize that you have a relationship, that a relationship kind of system is something that exists and that can be operated on, and that you try and build better collaboration. This is obviously the basis of the culture fit interview, right? So we're looking for this kind of skill when we're hiring, and we're trying to find ways of helping everyone in the business develop it and get better at it. The final point I want to make is that in general, as we work with visual management as a in terms of the skills of self-management, is that because it's a visual tool, that's a mirror, that's a hand mirror. We see ourselves doing a load of stuff. And remembering that so much of our brain is the visual cortex, seeing stuff is really powerful. Right? There's a tool that's used in psychology, which is that you get people to act stuff out. If they're afraid of stuff, if they have fears, you get them to act it out, for instance, in front of a mirror, so that you can sort of see that these things are okay. It's quite a powerful way to program the brain. So by having this tool, managing the workflow visually, we can see ourselves doing a load of stuff which is really important. Moving work, and we get into the habit of observing this stuff. Moving work forward, handing work over, adding value or not, right? Asking ourselves if we are adding value. Managing the work in progress, changing the workflow, and working on systems in general. So we know that we're doing that stuff, and by having a visual tool, we build self-awareness about the fact that we're doing it. So, these are some of the reasons I think why doing visual management of workflow is a really worthwhile thing, both for managing the work that is contained in that management system, but also in terms of helping the business advance its agenda of self-management. So with this in mind, Daisy, Anish and I are meeting with Steve from Stephen & Cohen tomorrow morning, and he's going to help us build a visual workflow for some part of the kind of tax credits workflow, and the three of us are going to work on that as a bit of a pilot project, and hopefully other people will start to see it and want to get involved in it, and we'll expand it over time. I'm also very interested in building some kind of visual management, as I've talked about before, for the kind of improvements in the organization, kind of the new products, the strategy, stuff like that. And Steve has recommended this tool called the Balanced Scorecard as possibly a way of recording the various experiments that we're thinking of doing and looking at the dependencies and the things that we're measuring and drawing on the stuff like the lean startup. So I'm going to do some reading into that next week. I know that Pauline is very interested in working on that with me. I think that Jason's as well. I'm going to touch base with him. Anybody else who wants to get involved in that, please come and grab me. So that's the theory. Those are two practical steps that we're going to take in response to that in the upcoming week. This is an experimental way of doing GrantTree fundamentals. Thank you for bearing with me while I drew my chalkboard. I can see why on those animation videos when people do this, they do the voiceover separately, because remembering how to draw at the same time as talking is really difficult. It turns out that teaching really is as hard as they say. So yeah, any comments, any questions?
What's in the meeting with Stephen Cohen? Which area you started with?
I suspect that we will start with tax credits delivery, but I'm going to be guided by him, because one of the things that he said is that the reason why he's coming to do it is he said, look, you could do this yourself, but there are some things about visual management of the workflow, there are some things that actually are quite counterintuitive and will probably accelerate your learning if we come in and design it for you. So I'll be guided by him as to what the best place to start is.
Because I thought, based on the conversation we've had, I thought the best place to start at the beginning, so to speak. So that would be my only worry. By starting in the middle, how would you know whether it's right or it links up? That would be sort of...
Yeah. I think whatever we do, we're going to try a bit of it, and with a view to learning how to do this as a business and to expand it across.
So it's to get a handle on the skill base more than...
Yes, to get a handle on the skill base, to start practicing it, to see how it works, to sort of, to get that, and then to start kind of rolling it out. Daniel usually has something to say, but not this week apparently.
I'm just, no, I don't have a lot to add. It's a pretty complete presentation.
I think this is really great. I mean, I've been trying to do the data visualization project on G2, and it's been really difficult to actually figure out what to build, so yeah.
I think one of the interesting challenges for that system for us is, which I'm really curious what solution Steve has for that, is that the reason why they like to do pieces of paper, post-its and so on in projects is because it actually keeps the projects smaller. So it reduces the number of tasks you can be tracking at once, because on a Kanban board you can track, I don't know, maybe 10, it's restricted by size to track only 10 tasks in each column and to have only 3 or 4 columns. So you're not allowed to have any more, you have to remove one to add another one. And fortunately we have something like 400 active clients. That's a lot of post-it notes.
Yeah, yeah. That's going to be, I mean, that's definitely going to be a big challenge, right? And one of the reasons why I'm keen to say, okay, let's start with a really simple paper-based prototype is because it's much easier to mess around with paper and to get it wrong and go, oh, no, I didn't mean that, and cross it out and move it around, and actually start to think, okay, right, so if we start with, let's say we just start with the live claims where there has been some contact with the client that's produced some of the data, right? And we just track those live claims that Daisy and Ish are lurking. Well, that's going to help us learn a little bit about how work moves across that workflow and what the needs are for mapping that. So we're starting to sort of think and learn. And then as we start to expand it to say, okay, how can we spread this out to start to capture the stuff where we've got client work in a queue and, you know, that's kind of not ready to move or whatever. Yeah, these are big questions for me. And we may say, well, actually, in the end, we just need one wall with a hell of a lot of post-its on because we find the post-its really useful. Or we might say, well, the post-its have been really useful as a kind of paper-based prototyping, but now what we need to do is to replace this with a digital tool that makes it easier to hold, you know, that kind of volume of work and makes it easier for remote people to interact with, etc. But rather than just say, okay, Greenie, build us a prototype and then we'll just fire feedback at you continuously over the next 6 weeks as we tweak it, we have the opportunity to say, okay, I don't need to ask, I don't need to send anybody feedback, because if I want to change it, I can just change it like this until we're all reasonably happy with it, and then we look for the digital solution. So we're actually using the kind of user-centered design stuff that's been, that Greenie's been, you know, sharing in the courses to say, you know, let's actually work out what the stuff is that we need to solve before we try and identify or build a tool to do it.
Well, yeah, it's not a CRM. So, say for example, in the beginning we just have 5 clients on it. When we look to deal with 400 clients, maybe we just have a window with the number 400 in it, which ceases to be 400 post-it notes, but has the information which you can then draw on from your CRM. It's never going to be a post-it note 400 client management system. It's just to give a visualization on that number, volume, and where the bottleneck is.
I think that there won't be a problem with us doing it, because when you think about the fact that those 400 clients are split over a 2-year period, like their financial year end, so any 1 month, there's not actually that many that have just been, like the year end has passed, so even if we only show clients that the year end has passed and the claim hasn't finished, it's not a huge amount. And I think that that's why the tax credits ops is the right place to start, because it is a certain specific amount, and I don't think it will be overwhelming. Whereas when it comes to sales, because there's so many that could be in different stages in the pipeline, and the pipeline isn't quite so clearly set out as with tax credits ops, I think that that's why this makes it the right place to start.
Yeah, things are much more likely to jump a stage in a sales pipeline, whereas here, you know, they have to go from stage to stage to stage. And yeah, you know, it may be that what we end up with is something like a hybrid tool. You know, I know that obviously, Rowan, you and I were talking about the kind of cost of delay stuff and how that might apply to sales, and thinking about, okay, I mean, maybe we have a tool which sort of says, you know, there are, you know, like 150 things here, but these are the 20 things that pop up according to the kind of like hotness algorithm that we've set, so that we actually just end up in front of a board where we're looking at a smaller number of tasks and talking about it, and simultaneously making sure that that hotness algorithm is continuing to serve us, you know, improving that. So I don't know what it's going to look like, but you know, I think it's a good idea to get something out there and start engaging with this.
One counterpoint is I mean, I don't know what the plan base looks like now, but I think Greenie did a calculation recently, I think, and there was something like £2.7 million of open claims. So I don't think you're correct that there's only a few open. There's only a few that you guys are looking at because they're live and active and reacting and stuff. But the point of this, I think, is to make the entire system visible, and that would include all the dormant claims that we're not currently looking at, that maybe we should be looking at.
But if you think about,
I think
think about 400
you
claims
both
divided by
might need to
24
start.
months,
Sorry, one person at a time. You gave us that one.
if you have 400 claims split over 24 months, which is the 2 years, and we're all caught up, like we don't have any that we're like trying to catch up on now, that I don't know, you're just gonna do 400
It
claims.
needs to start again. It needs to start again. You take it from somebody phoning in, knocking on our door, you take it from there to the very end. You don't start in the middle, you can't start in the middle. Because it's like building the Euro tunnel. You start in France, you start in England, you're going to get to the middle, it's going to be off. If you start on one end, take it all the way through to the other country, it's consistent all the way through.
When you look at systemic thinking, organisational cybernetics, it's actually fine to start wherever. It's a particular way of thinking, a way of visualisation, and it kind of works. It's been around since the 50s, so it's not a particularly new thing. And if you look at sort of my doctoral stuff was on socio-cybernetics, so I had to do quite a lot of organisational cybernetics research into that. And starting in the middle is absolutely fine, because what we need to do is we need to develop a way of thinking about the workflow more than actually an actual workflow at this point, because then it becomes second nature.
Doesn't overlap with how our clients control us, deal with us, or things like that.
It makes things easy to understand. And we're in a strong position because the basis of it all is communication, as you said. The basis of systems thinking is communication. That's what it is.
Everybody we've spoken to said, start from the customer, walk away. Every piece of software they talk about developing, things like that, start from the user, start from the user, start from the user. So what we're saying now is we should contradict that. I would say, if you say it's fine, I would sooner take it from...
I don't think anybody has said that.
Okay.
No.
So no one said start in the middle?
No.
So it's okay.
Well, it depends what you mean by middle.
We're starting by visualising the middle of the workflow. We're not actually starting at the middle of the workflow.
But the beauty for me is that I think that these are really important points, but at the moment, how do we respond to them? Once we start to have some kind of visual system, we get to draw on all of this stuff to be actually able to frame that conversation and to say exactly as you say, are we thinking about the user? Are we thinking about it from the point of view of what it achieves for the client and what it is that the client wants? We're like, oh, right, okay. Well, maybe we should make some changes to the workflow in order to think about what the client wants. Maybe we don't know enough about the client wants. Maybe we should go away and find out. But it becomes a point from which these conversations and these experiments can begin.
So like this is an idea that's so integrating the whole sales and the tax rates and so on, and trying to avoid having giant teams and huge piles of work building up has been something that Andrew and I, for example, have been talking about for some time, and I also spoke with Amar and stuff. And one of the difficulties has always been that although technically we could split the client management work into smaller teams with. And we've tried that with the Team Bacon, Team Egg and stuff. We could theoretically figure out a way to split this up. It's not split at the sales front ends because naturally we have one stream of inbound clients, we have one stream of outbound clients, and it doesn't make natural sense to split them. But maybe somebody can come up with some kind of creative solution that enables us to manage the number of clients by somehow creating some kind of way to split it into teams. I don't know, like I'm just throwing the idea out there.
The split is internal, it's not how to work. Whether when the work comes in, somebody goes, yes, I want to work with you. It's a single track journey. It only happens to fall within our infrastructure.
What I'm saying is that so the way they deal with this in software is they would take a project and split it into sub-projects and have each project have its own Kanban board, its own team and stuff, and they have their entire workflow visible, and each team is able to operate together as a team on one set. One set of pieces of work.
We go away and build these sections separately and come back together.
No, I'm not saying that at all. So please let me finish.
Go for it.
The way they do it in software is they build. They each have their own Kanban board. They each have ownership of their total piece of work. They've been given an objective. You have to build this thing, and then they have their own team with their own Kanban board. That doesn't directly translate to what we do because of largely because of the sales thing, because we can't separate out and have, say, 5 different sales pipelines and therefore split out the client base into 5 different identical work streams, where each work stream would be the same. It's just it would have a different set of clients going through. We can't really do that, not from the start. I don't know what the solution is to that. I've tried to think of a solution, I haven't thought of one. It's just an interesting, like, it kind of prevents us from doing what software teams do, but maybe there's another solution that we can do.
How do you think the start's different then?
With software, they own all the tasks for their project, and there's not like a source of tasks that's outside the system. Everything is within the system. If we do this here, at least the way I imagine it right now, which is clearly broken, we would have a source that's kind of outside of your stream, which then gets apportioned between, and so you wouldn't have total ownership. So one way to do this, if we could somehow structure the business this way, which I don't think we can, would be to have small teams of like, one salesperson and 3 CM who each have their own stream of clients, their own stream of inbound. Obviously, it doesn't. I know that you're shaking your head. I know it doesn't work.
They overlap. Because each client's got the same experience, whether they have 3 or 1, it's coming in. The other thing, if you go beyond the...
No, I'm not saying they don't overlap.
If you go beyond with the software, you're dealing with it from a software point of view, which is the same as doing it from a CM's point of view. The softwares are developing that solution because someone's turned around to them and asked them to. How has it got there? It's come from the sales team. Salesperson's turned around to a software developer and gone, here's a solution, this is what we'll do. There's a workload that's going to your developers. So you're actually building a funnel.
There isn't.
I feel like
so
this conversation is drifting. It's very interesting, but it's kind of drifting away from the focus of the particular meeting. I think the point that started off this discussion, I think there were kind of 2 important points. One was from Dom, which is that it's really important to keep thinking in terms of the needs of the client. And when we're reviewing our workflow and thinking about improving it, we're thinking about eliminating waste. Why do we want to eliminate waste? Because we want to focus the workflow on delivering value. Value to the client either is in the form of the product becoming more valuable, i.e. the claim becoming more complete, or it's in terms of increasing goodwill. But we need to be focusing on that when we interact with workflow. It's really important. But it's also the case, and I think that the point that Daniel started from, was that we do have a very large volume of work, and these kind of visual systems try and encourage you to keep the volume smaller, right? That's one of the reasons you use visualization, is to help you manage work in progress. We have a lot of work in progress. One of the ways in which software teams would manage a product, a system where there was a lot of work in progress, would be to divide that work in progress up into smaller subsets and have each subset owned by a kind of discrete team and managed separately, which kind of doesn't work for us, as Dan was saying. We'd explored it with Amar, but there may be some stuff that we can learn, there's some stuff that we can do.
I think what you were saying is that the cost of delay is bigger when you start a piece of work but don't finish it. Is that right?
Oh, okay, cost of delay. There's always, it's such a confusing title. So the cost of delay is, what is the cost of this piece of work not being finished at this particular point in time?
Right.
Right. So cost of
my point was, I think that from a previous presentation, I've got the idea that it's a bad thing to start a piece of work when you're not able to finish it at the same time. Like, you want to begin it when you don't want to waste time with the chasing, basically, or any particular task. You don't want to start the couch when you don't have everything ready there to finish them. And I think that what this will do, or what I'm hoping anyway, is that once we do have it, it will help us with our efficiency, as you say, like, as we're learning all these things. And then, it might come to address Dan's point that we will only kick off a piece of work when we're ready to take it through the whole thing right away. Like, that's obviously the ideal. I think that's sort of, in my mind, the goal of the visual management, is to cut out all of them being started and finished.
Well, it probably... Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I hope that one of the things that this will do is it will frame a way of us thinking about saying, how is it that we can both manage the need of the client to be in contact with us and to feel that their work is ongoing, and our need to actually do the most efficient possible work. There's something that's as close to the most efficient workflow as possible, where the most efficient workflow would be single piece flow that you just pick up from and take from one end to the other and then put down. I pick it up, I come in at 9 o'clock, I pick up a claim, by 5 o'clock I send it out to HMRC, I do 5 claims a week, right? Or 4 claims a week if you work part-time. But we have to manage both of those, and actually starting to think, oh, well, maybe we need some kind of actually thinking about, this is the workflow, and there are people who are doing this kind of back-end bit, and that's kind of doing end to end, and then there's another team which are contacting the client and filing the stuff in, but maybe that doesn't work. But we start to have a way of saying, hey, how can we solve this problem? You know, how can we improve the system so that we start to meet all of these needs better?
It's also, so imagine like come December year ends, it may be that we do a different system, because when we've got that many year ends in such a small window of time, it's a more efficient way of doing it. Maybe when it's quieter, we realise that actually, yeah, there is time just to do the financials because it would help us out next month. Well, actually, are the financials the best thing to get, or would it be something else? Or would it be maybe we're a bit more proactive about booking meetings? That's what it gives you, that sort of agility, not just sort of running the same process over and over again.
You look like you were going to say something then, no?
No, no.
Okay, any more for any more?
Go on.
Okay, awesome. Thanks very much, everybody.